if you are aiming for the perfect product or the perfect service, it will never come. So it's about putting it out there, getting the market response, and then pivoting from there.
Welcome to the One Day at a Time podcast, where we take things one day at a time. Today in the studio, we have Jeff.
Hey, JJ. Thanks for having
Jeff,
me.
Thank you for coming down. Would you mind doing a quick introduction about yourself and what you do?
Sure. My name is Jeff. I'm the co-founder of BigTiny. So at BigTiny, basically what we do is we are a experiential accommodation space provider in the ecotourism sector. So currently till date, we have about close to 300 to 400 tiny houses that are deployed across Australia, New Zealand. We have them in Spain, Italy, France, Sweden. And closer to home, we have them in Taiwan, Malaysia. And our most recent project is actually in Singapore on Lazarus Island.
Yeah, I saw that. You actually explained it very, very intricately. So you talked about like the eco-sustainability thing and providing what's the word they use? Experiential accommodation, right? So when did this idea of like building tiny houses begin for? Because I would personally think that in Singapore, that's not something that's very practical, right? Like we watch certain shows, maybe like many years ago, people do build tiny houses, like maybe in the US and things like that, because houses are expensive. So you kind of like buy like a trailer thing and then you build your thing, right? But in Singapore, that's not very practical. So how did this idea of starting this company in Singapore like come to you and your partners?
Okay, I would say it probably started all the way back in 2016, 2017-ish. My two partners, Adrian, Dave, and myself, we love the concept of farm stays in Australia because what we find is that it relaxes us to be out in nature where you are sort of disconnected from the hustle and bustle, of city life, where, we are also much tethered to our digital computers, our handphones and everything. So we wanted to bring that kind of stress-free experience to city dwellers from around the world. And that was when we actually took a look at the tiny house movement, which started all the way, I think, quite long ago in 1970s. So like you said, the tiny house movement actually started off because a lot of Americans, they wanted to lower their mortgage and enjoy more financial freedom. So they had downsized to a smaller dwelling unit that is anything that's below 400 square foot in space. But of course, I think that didn't really take off, didn't become mainstream. But what evolved from the tiny house movement was that the minimalist way of living appealed to a lot of people because by pure fact of a person staying in a tiny house, they actually reduce their carbon footprint by 48%. So this is the concept that we took to BigTiny in the sense that it actually enables travelers to go for sustainable travel options. And actually, that is something that's very viable and something that's trending wildly because we want to minimize the impact of tourism on the environment as well.
Oh, I see. Oh, I mean, you mentioned something that's very interesting, which is that, which I didn't know, which is that the tiny house movement started decades ago. I thought it's a 2000s thing because that was when I kind of found out about it, right? But before you even went into this whole like tiny house movement thing, you and your partners kind of enjoyed the idea of basically getting away And you mentioned that you want to provide city dwellers like with an option that is more sustainable but also like allows them to relax. And then why Singapore though? Because there are after you have been around for a while, you expanded to many places. Then only recently you came back to Singapore to build like a tiny house facility thing at Lazarus Island, right? So how did you and your partners go from the tiny house movement to building this thing that kind of started overseas actually?
So I guess for us, you're exactly right. We didn't start here in Singapore. Our first area of operations is actually in Australia. So the reason why we chose Australia back then was because Australia had vast expanses of land. And we also wanted a business model that gives back to the community. So this is also where I think BigTiny is a little bit different from other companies because we actually partner with land partners. So the landowners themselves, rural landowners, because what we saw back then as an opportunity gap was that the rural landowners, they actually own very big pieces of land, but they're utilizing maybe 20 to 30% max. So what we are hoping to do is to help them monetize their unused space and also provide them with a sustainable source of income, because I think they are mostly farmers, so they are also at the mercy of Mother Nature. So when there's prolonged periods of droughts or floods, then their livelihoods gets affected.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why we looked at Australia first.
Right.
Then how we came back to Singapore, I guess we have to thank the pandemic for that as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it was during the circuit breaker period when I think all the international borders were closed. So that was the point where I was like, wow, maybe I should reach out to our local government agencies. So I wrote an email to MTI, Ministry of Trade and Industries, to share with them this concept that, hey, you know what, our fruits of our labor has always been enjoyed by the Australians. And then since now the international borders are closed, why not let us have a chance to bring our concept back to Singapore so Singaporeans can also enjoy it as a staycation option. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
So when you built this entire thing, did you feel like, did you at that point in time feel like the tiny house movement would kind of pick up over time? Because you have very specific and very, I would say, quite noble goals also lah, because like by building this entire thing and building up the movement, you are not just helping the planet in some way, and you're helping the people who own land who might not be fully leveraging on their land and might be suffering due to like natural disasters and drought and things like that you mentioned, right? So how did you at that time feel like the tiny house movement would pick up and become sort of a thing? Because it didn't really pick up, like as you mentioned in the beginning. From your perspective, did it pick up over the years?
I would say it picked up, but not in the original intended way, because I think original intentions of the people who started the tiny house movement was about it being a residential dwelling unit. So I would say that that intention is still there, but what really picked up over the years is actually using these tiny houses as an accommodation option. Because I think for us, a very big thing is about reducing barriers. So, for example, sustainable travels, when you mention the first thing about reconnecting with nature, for me personally, at least, right, then I'll think of, okay, reconnecting nature, I won't have a proper place to stay. It'll be very hot. I can't have a proper shower. I can't eat proper food. So the very first notion was actually to cross that hurdle of comfort. So in our tiny houses itself, it comes with a queen-size bed. It has air conditioning, which we Singaporeans can't live without. It has a toilet with hot water shower, fully equipped kitchenette. So that is the first step that we wanted city dwellers to take, which is baby steps towards reconnecting with nature. Because all our tiny houses are placed in rural areas where the scenery is amazing. They just need to open the door and they actually step out into nature. So that's, of course, number one. And then number two, of course, if you talk about sustainable travels, a lot of things that would pop up in a lot of people's mind would be about probably it being more expensive, about compromising. So what we wanted to do is also to provide these travelers who are thinking about sustainable travels with a very affordable option, because we price our stays between $200 to $300 a night, which is not really out of reach for a lot of people. And then with that, they are actually also doing their part for the environment, either consciously or unconsciously, because we also make it a point to place a guest book in every single one of our tiny houses that explains our concept. Like, for example, how the tiny house is built up using sustainable materials, like the solar panels, the eco tech that we incorporate into the house. Like Singapore one, we actually partnered up with another local company called Westcom, where every single one of our tiny houses on Lazarus Island actually has a food digester. So it enables like waste food, for example, to be put into the waste recycling. And then what happens is within 24 hours, it turns into compost, which can be after that used as fertilizers.
Wow.
Yeah.
So like just based on your description alone, I would think that, you know, the journey to R&D, the whole tiny house thing, right? Because whatever you guys are building, right, you are doing it yourself, your own factory and everything. Whatever you guys are doing is slightly different from the initial concept of tiny houses, which is basically just downsizing, essentially, right? And to the idea of you own less, then you actually own more type of thing, right? But for you and your partners, you had to kind of I would think, jump through quite a lot of hoops to solve, to R&D this product, which is the actual house itself, to kind of find the sustainable materials, build the thing, make sure that it is durable, because if you're building all these houses in places that is not Singapore, it is subjected to a lot of wear and tear due to weather and like the harshness of the weather and everything. So how long did it take you and your partners to kind of figure out this R&Ding the entire process of like the tiny house, and what are some of the major challenges that you face along the way?
Okay, I would say that we probably took about a year or two.
Oh, that's pretty fast actually.
Yeah, so
Right, yeah.
it is. I think we started thinking about this concept all the way back in 2016. Okay, but of course, the model that we came up with during that period of time, it also evolves along the way because, like you mentioned, every business has its challenges.
Yeah.
So it's about how we react, and I think that's the good thing about being in a startup because we are more nimble in terms of pivoting. For example, so in terms of challenges, I would say there were quite a number of challenges because. First of all, I think not a lot of people heard about tiny houses
Correct.
in the first place.
Absolutely.
So there was, of course, the education. And then, of course, because we are not using it as the original intended of residential dwellings, it is about it being an experiential accommodation space. So it's an entirely new concept back then as well. So it's also about sharing with the people, that, hey, if you are traveling, the trend now, of course, is more towards experiences. So what people can do, what people feel and actually see and touch when they're at the location itself. So it's about placing this benefit in front of the travelers as an option for them. And then, of course, like you mentioned, actually all three of us, none of us have any experience in tiny houses. So it's about picking out skills along the way. Like, for example, Dave actually went through a tiny house building workshop.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Where is that?
Australia.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's where we actually learned about that. And then after the rest of the things, we picked it up along the way. So, of course, doing a lot of market research, a lot of learnings, a lot of partnerships, for example, with the local councils, the Australian Tiny House Association back then as well. Yep.
Well, I gotta say that it is extremely impressive because what did you do before this entire tiny house thing, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. So for myself, I was actually in the advertising industry for 10 over years.
Right. Nothing to do with tiny houses.
Nothing to do with tiny houses, yeah. But I think a common theme that went through is because even in advertising, for example, I worked on brands that actually promote a better world, in terms, for example.
Right.
So I think that is a common theme. So I also have another startup back then as well that is a social enterprise helping people in Bangkok.
I see.
Yeah, so I think all that experience, of course, coupled with my training in SAF because I was a Navy regular as well.
Oh, I see.
For a while. So it actually all helped to shape what BigTiny is today.
I see. I mean, I think there are experiences that can be kind of rolled over to the next thing, but in terms of the actual practical thing, like understanding not just how to R&D and build this thing, but also like I would imagine whatever you do, you will need to jump through a lot of regulatory hoops to be able to connect with lawmakers or like regulatory bodies that is not even local, and that must have been quite a journey, right? To kind of figure that out with starting out with just a passion to kind of like build something that can help people with ecotourism and everything. What did you feel like your main motivation for building this company is, apart from trying to help, like the farmers that you're talking about, like trying to build up this whole ecotourism thing, like for you and your partners, I know that like things are pretty cool now, pretty good now, you're expanding, but in the beginning, I would imagine that it's very difficult. I came across your partner and what you guys are doing, I think sometime in 2018, quite a while ago, and I know for a fact at that time it was really a lot of building and there are tough times right? And now you're in a really good place. But what did you think is like the main motivating factor for you and your partners to kind of like see it through? Because there is no real business model to follow because you're starting something from really nothing. Like there's this concept of a movement, but you had to jump through so many hoops and kind of build your own workflow, build your own model. There's no point of reference. What pushed you through all the way until today where the company is doing well, is still standing?
Right. I guess it's the passion. So I think my two partners and myself, we really wanted to do something that would lessen the impact of tourism on the environment itself. So I guess that's what saw us through because like you mentioned, we were a Singaporean company operating in Australia or in New Zealand and all the other countries. So we had to do a lot of research with regards to the regulatory differences because in Australia, there are different states and different states have different rulings as well. But I mean, generally, they are quite okay because they are also very much aligned to our eco vision, where it's about sustainable travel options for all the holiday goers, for example. So I think a thing that really helped push us through is also because of the fact that all three of us have big families. Adrian has 3 kids. I have 3 kids. Dave has 4 kids.
Wow.
So it's really
Nice.
a do or die kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that sort of also makes us push it through. But of course, I think it's heartening because I think in 2018, when you first got to know us, we were already cash flow positive.
Right.
Yeah, in 1 year into operation. So I think we were
Yeah.
very lucky because we met up with a lot of council members, local council members who also believed in our business model and also Enterprise Singapore because they've been excellent in supporting us in terms of the connections and the network that they have as well in Australia.
Right.
Yeah.
I see. So wow, to be cash flow positive in after 1 year of operations is quite rare, quite tough for I mean, a lot of people have startups. Like startups come and go very quickly, but not many startups. Not every startup is I guess what they call like a disruptor in the market. Like you're really doing something brand new. Not many people have taken this concept this far before. And as far as I understand, apart from ecotourism and helping people who are looking to travel more sustainably have a easy option, you also actually have another branch called Tiny Assets, right? Which is targeted at, I mean, that was actually how I found out about you guys, right? Which is targeted at people who have I guess like money to invest and to invest in a traditional real estate landed or apartment, the quantum is quite big, right? Especially in Singapore. And even if you buy apartments in a foreign country, there are also a lot of regulations to understand and it might be quite risky lah. And Tiny Assets was the solution, right? That BigTiny came up with, that the entry price can be quite palatable for a regular working Singaporean to kind of own a part or own a tiny house where you guys manage the rental and they can earn rental income. Can you share a little bit more about like Tiny Assets as well?
Sure. So BigTiny is actually our holding company. Just to give a bit of background. So Tiny Assets is actually our sales and marketing arm. Then of course we also have BuildTiny, which is our design and building construction arm. And then we have Tiny Away, which is our hospitality arm. And that's actually the main brand that we go out for in terms of our rental business. And then of course in November 2018, we acquired this company called Tiny Real Estate. So that is like a carousel of sorts for everything that's related to tiny houses. Like, for example, tiny house blueprints, brand new secondhand tiny houses, tiny house furniture. So with that acquisition back in November 2018, BigTiny actually became a 360 provider. So right from the start, where we design and manufacture our own tiny houses, to people buying the houses from us, we ship worldwide as well from anywhere in the world. And then, of course, after that, if they like, can have us manage the tiny houses for them to earn rental yields. So I will correct you a bit here. It's not exactly an investment per se.
Right.
It's more of I would say, a sale management program. So that's what Tiny Assets sells. Whereby the clients themselves, they can buy a tiny house from us. So right now, the starting price is about 90,000 onwards, depending on what they want, because we do have quite a number of tiny house models available for sale.
Right.
So what happens after they buy the tiny house from us is that we will build the tiny house fresh from our factories in Malaysia.
Right.
And then we'll ship them across to Australia. But these tiny houses wise is registered in their name. So they are in essence owning the tiny house. But the interesting thing that we saw, the opportunity that we saw back then was that tiny houses wise, they are regulated as caravans in Australia.
Right.
So it means that regardless of how many houses you own, tiny houses for that matter, you own, there's no ABST.
Nice.
There's no property taxes or whatnot. So we actually saw this this business model of ours. Initially, it was only meant for the 3 of us because this was the way we saw that we could grow our wealth.
Right.
And basically, it's a disruptor to traditional real estate investment model.
Yeah.
But of course, I think word got out. I think we were featured in Straits Times in 2018. That's where probably you saw us as well.
Yeah.
So a lot of people actually called us and asked if they could be a part of this
new
business model.
Yeah.
So that was actually the point in time when we spoke to our lawyers and we structured something so that at least the public can come in.
Right.
So they buy the houses, they are the owners. Then we are the ones that help them to manage the hassle, or for example, listing of it on the platforms, accommodation rental platforms like Airbnb, Booking.com, Trivago, and all that. We are on a total of 10 different platforms, including ours at tinyaway.com. And then we help them with guest liaison. We make sure that the guest checks in, enjoys themselves, checks out. And then, of course, via that, they are actually given a quite competitive rental yield. So in essence, it's like they are the landlord, we are the tenants, they are the landlord. So we are renting their house from them.
Right.
But of course, we sublet it out to holiday goers. But we manage everything end to end. So I think that's something that you like as well. It's really hassle-free.
Right.
So you don't have to really lift a finger. Yeah.
So it's kind of like, would you say it's kind of like co-living, where like co-living operators, they either buy or rent a whole bunch of places from like the landlord, and then like they build it nicely, they renovate it, then they segregate the thing, then they sublet it out. Just that for you, for BigTiny, it's slightly different because of the little pocket of regulations. You are not really seen as real estate because it is seen as a caravan, right?
Yep.
So you don't have all your property tax and everything, as you mentioned, and it's a nice little pocket of space where you can play around with. But would you mind if I ask you why you specifically say that it is not an investment? Because it does seem like one, because you are basically putting money into buying a somewhat of an asset, right? The build itself, the expertise is somewhat of an asset, and then the expertise in like actually property management, tiny house management, it's also an asset, it's something that's quite you need network and skill. So why wouldn't you term this as an investment?
Okay, I would say that's the common misconception, and I would say probably 99% of our clients think that it's an investment.
Right.
But how we see it actually is because you are buying a good, for example, or like what you mentioned, it's actually like a co-living space. So if you are really rich, you could buy a whole building.
Yeah.
You own it, but we are like the management company or the property manager to help you to manage it. So it's not really an investment per se. So it's like the co-living concept, or maybe in another analogy, it's like you buy a car. And then I help you to find a Grab driver who wants to rent your car for you, or I rent your car from you, and then I sublet it to another Grab driver, for example.
Right.
And then we make the some profit from in between the transaction. So technically speaking, not an investment, because an investment, for example, would entail, let's say, same amount of money, let's say 90K, but you're investing the 90K into my company.
So got it.
We are actually mitigating the risk, because if it's the latter scenario about you investing 90K and, for example, we fail, okay, your 90K will be gone. But in this case, the 90K that you actually spend is actually into buying a tangible asset that has a market value.
Right.
So this is also how we protect the interests of our clients, because if the company fails, in the rare occasion that the company fails, okay, you still own the tiny house, and you still are able to sell the tiny house off in the Australian market. You probably can get back your 90K, because this is also something that we have devised and thought of from the start. Because if you look at, for example, a similar quality tiny house in Australia, it'll probably set you back by at least 100 to 120,000. Okay, and that would come empty. Whereas ours is 90K, it comes fully furnished.
Right.
Why are we able to provide such a competitive pricing? Because we have volume.
Right, you build your own.
Correct. We build our own, we have volume. So we are able to enjoy economies of scale, which is something that we hope to pass on this benefit to our clients as well. So they are buying something that is of the same quality, but at a lower price, and they are protected in that sense, because everything that we do, I mean, a lot of us have been scammed before. The feeling is definitely not nice. So we do not wish this upon anybody at all. So when we actually structured this product, believe it or not, we actually place the benefits and interests of our clients first, and we mitigate the risk to a very low level. Because if you look at it, you buy the house, a lot of people may think at the start that it is a Ponzi. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why it could come across that way also.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
So what we do is we also implement like transparency in our business model, whereby ultimately the houses wise, like I mentioned earlier, right, they're listed on public platforms, Airbnb, Booking.com, Trivago.
Yeah.
So there's no way we can manipulate that information.
Yeah.
In a way.
Right.
And of course, if the houses basically are put in Australia, every tiny house has a vehicular identification number as well. So this is what we call the VIN. And it is like the NRIC of a tiny house. So in our system, how we track is that, for example, a client buys a tiny house. There will be actually a unique asset ID generated that in our system is tagged to the vehicular identification number of the tiny house. So this is how we ensure that every client who buys a house, there is an actual house. And the VIN number is also registered with the Australian government side. So it's much like our chassis number in a car.
Oh.
So this is how we protect the interests of our clients.
Got it. I really like the way that you explain like how it's like buying a car and like renting. So technically it is an investment, just that the investment is not into your company, but it's into the actual build itself, which is the in like a caravan type of house, right? So like you own, I give you 90K, you help me build this thing, and I own the house, I own the tiny asset, which is in the form of a little house that has like a serial number tagged to it and everything. And because of that, you are able to, as a service provider, to help manage the transactions through your network, your platforms, and therefore the return of investment does not actually come from investing into BigTiny, but it's BigTiny that enables us to invest into owning a tiny house. Is it correct to say that?
I would still wouldn't use the word invest.
You wouldn't use the word investment. Okay,
yeah, but basically we are leasing the house from you. So you are still the owner, we are like the tenant, for example.
Understand. So it's really like a like almost like a partnership sort
Something
of thing, like
like
a
that.
landlord-tenant relationship lah.
Yeah, or co-living, for example. So
Right,
you
I
are
see.
the owner of the building. So we are just managing it for you.
Yeah, because you know this concept, right, is quite intricate, right? It's quite intricate. The entire process of building and then like managing all the rentals, you know, securing placements on different platforms, Booking.coms and everything, is quite intricate. And I would think that most people, whether they are the tourists or they are the people that work with you to buy a tiny house and everything, this concept might be quite difficult to articulate to most people. Just like in our short conversation, right? You had to correct me a few times or so. And how do you feel like you and your partners have kind of managed to, I mean, the reason why you guys are doing well is because you probably managed to articulate it well enough to enough people that people are on board with the idea, right? Whether they are tourists or they are people who buy the houses and everything. How did you feel like you managed to kind of like summarize the entire complicated process enough that people can find it a bit more palatable?
I guess it's also, again, going back to the point about lowering the barrier of entry. So it's about boiling the whole concept down to its simplest form so that people could understand. Yeah, because I think what we have built at BigTiny is also this entire ecosystem that we own ourselves. So in a way that also mitigates the risk for our clients because we are able to control the entire process end to end. So I would say typically it would be 45 minutes to share this entire concept. Yeah, because I think there'll definitely be a lot of skeptical people outside.
For sure.
And definitely it is much harder at the start because when we first started this business, we had no track record, for example. And then, of course, as the years pass, we have track record of 5+ years. So we were able to share it more confidently. Yeah. So kudos to the people who started with us quite early in the journey. So basically, they saw how we've progressed as well. And of course, going back to the topic about simplifying it, it's really about making sure that the whole concept is boiled down so that the average layman on the street can understand this whole concept because tiny house movement itself is already very new. Then tiny house as an ecotourism experiential accommodation space probably is also something that's relatively new. And then, of course, boiling it down, building up this whole ecosystem where stakeholders are, for example, the clients, our rural land partners, for example, and doing our part for the environment and giving back to society. So this is something that we will probably take, half an hour to 45 minutes to really boil it down to our clients.
Yeah, and even then, it might not be fully, because there are so many intricacies and nuances to this entire thing. It's impossible for like someone like us to understand your entire journey and how you manage to structure this so intricately in 45 minutes, right? It's really impossible because it's such an intricately designed operation, and the way that you're presenting it, whether it's to a like a tourist or somebody who is keen to purchase a tiny house, is completely different because the perspective is also different, right? And after like years of operation, you manage to build up this sort of ecosystem where you are building and you're renting, and then you have so many stakeholders to work with, like your rural land partners, the clients, the tourism. And the next thing I'm very curious to know is how are you able to I would consider still a small company, right? A pretty small company with 3 founders and a few dozen staff here and there. How are you able to manage so many client and stakeholder relationships all across the globe? Because you're not operating in Singapore only, you're operating literally everywhere across the globe. How are you able to do that?
Yep. So I would say that for us in Singapore, at least, Singapore is the HQ of BigTiny. So this is also where our core management staff sits. Okay. Then I think we have to thank technology. So like right now there's Zoom, there's Google Hangouts and everything. So we do have monthly meetings with all our respective head of departments in the other countries as well. Also for the case of Australia, for example, we have a country manager, we have state managers, we have land sourcing teams, we have hospitality teams in Philippines, we have our tech team in India. Of course, we have clients here. We have our stakeholders from overseas as well.
Yeah.
So it's about, I think, constant communication and, of course, updates of how or where the company is going in the future as well. So it's about how you communicate these points regularly and in a very clear and succinct manner so that they are all aligned to how the company is developing. Yeah.
Would you say that like now today, after like quite a few years of like building BigTiny as a brand, as a business, would you say that as of today, you and your partners feel like you have achieved the key goals that you wanted to achieve from day one?
Okay, to this point, I think it's very interesting because I just had a discussion with Adrian and Dave a few days ago where I think we all felt that we have achieved the very, very basic milestones that we wanted to achieve. So actually in 2024, in fact, we are going to have our strategy retreat next week.
Oh, okay.
Where we're going to chart the direction going forth in 2024.
Right.
So for us, we felt we checked off a lot of tick boxes, but right now, moving forward is about how we can better the quality of our offerings, the quality of our product, and even how we can appeal to more and more people going forth in 2024. So to your question, yes, I think we've achieved the milestones that we've set out to do right at the start of the business. So now it's about finessing it to make it even better going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like based on our conversation, your initial idea was just, farm stays are cool. Let's like build some ecotourism farm stay alternative thing. And then it became such a different thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It became such a different thing. It's not just ecotourism farm stay anymore. It's like it's so much more than that. It's like building and then like finding out like who are the audiences and then working with the different stakeholders. It's a completely different operation.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think something interesting to share is that, when we first started the business and we started listing on Airbnb and Booking.com, it was us going down to the actual site in Australia and taking the pictures of the house using our handphones.
Right.
And then we listed it up. And then after a while, we realized that, our photos are like paling in comparison to the rest of the Airbnb listings. So what we did then was, because we had a little bit of profit, so we actually reinvested that kind of profits and we actually hired professional photographers to take the photos of our listings.
Wow. Okay.
So something that evolved along the way was, I guess, better quality photos. But we felt that it was still not enough because like if you engage a professional to take a photo, it will be akin to you stepping into a booth and taking a passport photo where, for example, you're not allowed to smile, you're visible, your features must be visible.
Right.
So it went one step further because we thought, okay, the people who would be looking at the listings would be travelers who are looking for a stay. So why not engage the target audience? So we went down the path of actually engaging with guests who are photographers themselves.
Oh, wow.
So what we do is we'll exclusively invite them to new sites, new listings in Australia or New Zealand or whichever country they're operating in. We give them a one-night complimentary stay. And in exchange, they have to give us high-res photos and videos taken through their eyes, their point of view on what interests them in the tiny house, in the surroundings. And then this was how basically the whole business model also sort of evolved because
Right.
we did something that's easy, quick and dirty first. Then we monitored the response and then we improved along the way. So this I thought was a quite interesting example of how we are progressing. Of course, this is applied to the other aspects of the business as well.
Absolutely. So it's a lot of pivoting, like analysis and pivoting until you pivot until like, the where you are now, right, is completely irrecognizable from the beginning, the beginning idea when you and your partners just sat down and say, farm stay, ecotourism, and then, it became a completely different thing. And something that I'm very keen to know is that, okay, so the fact of the matter is most startups like fail, especially those startups who are trying to disrupt the market, come up with something brand new that is unseen, unheard, like kind of like what you guys are doing. Most startups fail. And but you didn't. You and your partners managed to make it through all the hurdles and to be a sustainable business, not just in the ecotourism space, but in like cash flow and everything. You're a sustainable business and you're growing very quickly. What would you, and there are a lot of people that are younger, that are very keen on the entrepreneurial space and startups. What would you say is the one advice you would give somebody as a startup founder that would potentially help them make their startup a success?
I would say it may sound a bit cliche. I would say that a lot of research definitely at the start would be beneficial to the whole process of starting up your own business. The more crucial step is the determination to see it through and of course keeping an open mind to pivot along the way, like what we did, because an idea actually doesn't come fully formed at the start. Things may change, new trends may come up. So it's about how determined you are to make sure that your business is still relevant to the people, to the stakeholders, to your target audience, for example, and still staying true to your vision at the end. So it may be about doing something really fast, quick and dirty, putting it out in the market first, because if you are aiming for the perfect product or the perfect service, it will never come. So it's about putting it out there, getting the market response, and then